Joining me now is national reporter and columnist for the Washington Examiner and many other things, the Washington Post. There's so many things. And her name is Selena Zito. And of course, she is the author of the new book that is coming out. It is called Butler. And we're going to talk about that in the second segment. The subtitle is The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. The cover is stunning. I mean, a lot of us followed the news, followed the story. But Selena, she was there. She was a part of it in many different ways. And we're going to talk all about that in the second segment here. But let's get started, Selena. This weekend, on the 4th of July, was the terrible flooding tragedy of Camp Mystic and other parts in that Kerrville area of Texas. And I saw many of your posts over the weekend about it, especially encouraging people not to get political when it comes to a tragedy. And we don't really have to talk about that because I feel like those people are not worth talking about, those that did it. But you've covered many tragedies, you know, children, you know, camps, you know, all of those things. And it all sort of came together. I have a lot of personal connections with people who either had children at the camp. I don't know anyone whose children passed away, but I do know of a family whose daughter, 8-year-old daughter, was found clinging to a clothesline. And everyone's going through a lot down there. So let's turn it over to you for your reflections and advice for people as we watch this unfold.
It's such a terrible tragedy. And for a lot of American families, sending your kid off to camp, in particular one that's faith-based, is a very American tradition that goes back well over 150 years, right? Families have been doing this for generations, and they went, and their grandparents went, and they sent their kids and their grandkids, and to see just something that's so wholesome, so part of the American experience, to see this happen to these families and to these children is just absolutely heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. And I think what I love, you talked about, how people said horrible things, and it was absolutely horrible. But what I do love is the stories that uplift, right? You hear about people like throwing everything down and going down there, right? Even people that, okay, maybe they don't have rescue experience, but they're like, I'm here. I'll help with staging. I'll do whatever y'all need. I'm just here to help. And those stories are the ones that help us get through this tragedy.
Yeah, Lawrence Jones is down there for us. Of course, he's a co-host of Fox and Friends, and he's from Texas. And he said that Texas spirit was certainly shining through. And I think President Trump will probably head there towards the end of this week. All right, so we keep them on our hearts and in our prayers. Let's talk a little bit about the first 6 months of the Trump administration, because last week, President Trump was able to sign his budget bill, the big, beautiful bill. There's lots of policy in it. Look, I don't think it's not all that great. It's not all great. Okay, There's things in there that I'm like, oh, wait, what? And there are surprises, and these bills are so big. But it was a significant accomplishment for President Trump and Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune to get this done with the razor-thin margins of majorities that they have, and to get it done by the deadline that President Trump set. It does help get the president's agenda more solidified. And if you add that to the Supreme Court wins that he had at the end of last week, it's pretty good first 6 months.
Isn't it unbelievable 6 months? Whether you like President Trump or not, put that aside. The breadth of what he has accomplished, even in the last month. Let's just start with that U.S. Steel Nippon deal, right? And how interlocking all these accomplishments are. I went down and talked to the guys when Iran was they destabilized or whatever they did to the nuclear facilities, right? They blew them up, basically. They're like, you know what? We're part of that. Our steel helps make the B-52s. It helps make parts of the bombs. Mm-hmm. So we feel connected to something that was very, very patriotic and something that was very important to their country. So had that U.S. Steel deal not happened, right, there wouldn't be that connective tissue that we often miss in American politics. But there's also what happened with NATO, right? I mean, who saw that coming? Do you remember, 4 years ago when he went to his first NATO summit?
8 years ago.
Oh, 8 years ago. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Time. And there's so many things that have been happening. It's almost impossible to keep up with
And I
that.
think the fact that they've fixed the border in 8 days.
Like that. Like that.
And it does give lie to what President Biden's team had done. And I think that the Democrats are still grappling with the full scope and scale of opening the border and acting like it wasn't a problem, telling all of us it wasn't a problem, and still paying the price for that.
Yeah, and that impacted so many things in our lives. It impacted jobs, it impacted safety, it impacted crime, and it impacted our national security. People literally lost their lives because someone came across here that had criminal intent.
Yeah.
And we don't always think about the nuance of these decisions that the Biden administration making. I can remember, Dana, and I think you and I talked about it, saying, well, I don't understand why they think this is okay.
Yeah.
I don't understand why they think to tell us that it's not happening is smart. It was such a perplexing time in American politics.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is that while the President Trump is on a roll, the Biden team continues to be steamrolled by yet another book that's coming out. One of the authors is Josh Dawsey. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. He used to be at the Post, a great reporter. And he has a lot more reporting from what I saw in the previous books about Hunter Biden's interactions with his dad during the campaign, that apparently he watched the debate from his home in Los Angeles. And he said he apparently says he had never seen his dad that bad. And his advice to his dad was to get some sleep. Yeah. It wasn't to drop out of the race. It was get some sleep, everything will be fine. And it's just, it's impossible. You can't keep family away from a candidate. Of course not.
Right. Right.
But I don't think his family necessarily was helping him. And certainly it must have been difficult for the senior staff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that families helped him at all, period, on numerous decisions, including his decision to run the first time in 2020. I think that was...
You mean way back in 2020, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, if you read the Tapper book and sort of the questions that happened all the way back to 2015, after his son passes away, and sort of how he'd already lost his step way back then, he's still the vice president. And to encourage him and to put him through, especially if he's not in his top game or he's suffering, sort of a loss of his facilities, right? And then to push him to run anyways that's wrong, because you're literally causing someone to sort of unravel faster than they normally would.
In the meantime, the Democrats seem to have at least somebody new to talk about, and that is Zohran Mamdani. He is a Democratic socialist, self-described a Marxist, communist, who just won the Democratic primary in New York. Now, that's not necessarily a sign of things to come. It doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to win the mayor's race, though I think it's highly likely. Yeah. I do think, however, I saw something that Steve Bannon said the other day. I'm like, guys, pay attention. This guy is charming. He's young. He's talking about things that a lot of young Democrats in particular seem to like, even if the ideas won't pan out and there won't be amazing government-run grocery stores. He's figured out a way to communicate with new technologies and utilizing his ability to charm people. And he found a lane. There was an opening, and he's on it.
Yeah, he is on it. What I think is a challenge for Democrats, for a candidate like that, and to your point, he may well win. He may as well win. His problem, broadly speaking, is twofold. First of all, if you unpack who voted for him, it's white, college-educated, upper-middle-class voters, right? So it tells us that middle-class voters, whether they're Hispanic or white or black or whatever, are not motivated by this young man, right? they see the problems. That's going to be a problem if you're a candidate and you're running in a congressional district, right? Not one that is packed so it's just for a Democrat. But if you're in one like Chris DeLuzio in Western Pennsylvania, you can't run like that. You have a whole big swath of middle class voters, black, white, and Hispanic, who are that kind of rhetoric is not appealing to them. And so the second problem then becomes is that the Republicans, and we know the Republicans are going to do this because the Democrats do it to Republicans. They're going to say, this candidate A is just like him, right? Or this candidate or Democrats will do this to them and say he's not enough just like him, right? He has to be more left. He has to be more socialist.
Right.
There's going to be a squeeze from Republicans and left-wing Democrats for other Democrats trying to run, and they're constantly compared to him.
Always. It might be the end for New York City, but it's a great opportunity for Republicans.
Oh, yeah, it is. It really
And
is.
given where I live, over here where I live, you can see, he might not win, but I met this guy over the weekend. This is going to sound very weird. I didn't meet him. I just started talking with him in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And I thought he was hypothetically saying that he got 15 to life for murder, but turns out he did. He did get 15 to life for murder. He did 20. But anyway, we just ended up we were near to each other, and he was talking about the Diddy trial. And I said, I'm just curious, where do you get your news? Because I'm in the news business, and I'm wondering, because he had a lot of interesting ideas. I thought he was very well thought out opinions. And he believes that Mamdani might win. I said, well, what do you think about Eric Adams? And he said, he's playing a fool to catch a fool. And I thought, hey, that's a good line. I'm going to have to use that on Monday. And so I just did.
Really good line.
But I can't take credit for it. It was my friend my new friend. He was quite a character. And you meet all the characters. I want to dedicate this segment to talking about Selena Zito's book, Butler. It is coming out soon. The cover is amazing with President Trump there at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Selena was there to do an interview with the president, and she had her daughter and son-in-law with her. And this is the story, not just about what happened that day and in the aftermath, but about the movement that President Trump is leading, and some other personal touches that are sprinkled throughout the book, which I really, really love. So destined to be a bestseller. President Trump has endorsed it. She's got Ainsley Earhardt and Sean Hannity on the back as well. A triumph, and congratulations on it, Selena.
Thank you so much.
What was it like for you to write about those moments? Because I know you've talked about that day quite a bit. You did interviews, including on America's Newsroom, for which we were very grateful about it. But when you went to write it, did anything else bubble up for you that you hadn't thought about or didn't realize was on your mind or on your heart at the time?
So as far as the day goes, as far as that day goes, I, for some reason, I just have always been able to have very great recall and very great detail. Sometimes it's my worst enemy because it sticks inside my head. But I thought after, I started writing almost 3 weeks after the assassination attempt. And what I really wanted people to understand in writing this book, of course, to understand that day, how absolutely normal that day was, as normal as can be. But also to understand why the importance of place and rootedness in American politics. It's a nuance that pollsters miss, that strategists missed. But if you are on the ground, you understand how much that plays into people's decision on who they vote for. And it's hard to capture and it's hard to understand. But if you listen to people, you don't even need to ask them who they're voting for. It comes out in that answer. And place is important. A lot of people that are more transient, They leave home, they never come back, or, they leave home, they come back, but they stay, out of their hometown. The thing about place is it is something that is a part of, it's a middle class or middle America, I should say, power. And what do I mean by power? Well, their grandmother's up the street. Their children and their grandchildren are down the street. There is a sense of connectivity, and that you are living your best life, and you didn't need to go to another place to achieve that. It's something to be heralded. And that's so missed in understanding American politics. And I really wanted to make that sure that came through as I continued to cover the rest of that race. And I think a lot of times it didn't. A lot of times people didn't understand that. And even when my interview with Governor Shapiro in the book, he has a very deep understanding of place. And that's why I think that he is very successful at his job in governing.
Yeah, that was interesting for me to read because you've known him for quite a while.
I have. I've known him 20 plus years. I've covered him for a long time. And
this book, basically the start of it is an act of political violence from crooks against Trump.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we know what happened there. But Josh Shapiro, 2 years later, a victim of, or a year later, not even a year later, right? A victim of political violence as the governor's house is burned down.
Yeah, and one of the first phone calls Governor Shapiro got was from President Trump. And he, this was after the book was already put to bed. But, they had a deep and profound conversation about that. But just think about this. Both men in Pennsylvania, both the victims of men who had, it's hard to understand what Crook's political leanings were. Because he was all over the place and he left no footprint in terms of social media. So it's really difficult to understand. But both men were victims of people who wanted them gone, just hurt, like destroyed. And so there's always going to be that sort of connectivity between those two men.
You didn't write too much about crooks in here. And maybe that's for somebody else to write about another time. But what did you have a conscious decision to not do that?
No, it's just that there's not that much information.
Right.
I mean, I went to the neighborhood. I went to I went to the door. I went, my home until a couple years ago was just a couple, a mile or two from his house. I know that neighborhood intimately. But very few people knew that family. They lawyered up, so they weren't talking to anybody. There was no digital imprint. I did go to the Clariton gun range, the sportsman's range.
Yes, because you say that was like a big part of his life.
It was, and it was really sad. You know what part really made me feel like this guy was just detached from reality, right? He's at the gun range on Christmas Day, on Thanksgiving Day, on Valentine's Day, on Sundays, days where you usually, and for hours, days where you usually spend time with your family.
Yeah.
And that's telling you something about him. We don't know all the details about him. I certainly, as hard as I tried, I couldn't. It was just impenetrable. You just couldn't get that information.
Let's set that aside and talk about your personal relationship with the president. He thinks you have the best, most gorgeous hair in America. And look at this hair, everyone. This is true.
That's right.
It looks really good. It looks good.
Just for you, Dana.
It looks great. You don't have to do it for me, but I think it looks good. You describe him with a warmth that I don't think many people in America have an opportunity to see. Now, his fans maybe intuitively understand that. I've learned also from Caroline Levitt about how much he loves having children around him at the White House. But you got to experience that warmth when he called you the very next day.
So he called me, and people will read all the details about the book, but he called me bright and early the next morning. And he didn't even say, like, I didn't even say hello. And he said, Selena, this is President Trump. Like, I don't know it's President Trump, right? And the first thing he says to me, are you okay? Is Shannon okay? Shannon is my daughter. She took the photograph of the cover of the book. And is your son-in-law, Michael, okay? And we vainly brought my son-in-law along to that event just to carry the equipment so we wouldn't get hot and sweaty. We did anyways. And I did, oh my gosh, my parents are going to be so mad at me. But I swore at the president and said, are you bleeping kidding me, sir? You're the one that's been shot.
Yeah.
But we had some incredibly powerful, I believe it's 7 times that he called me.
Yeah,
that
I was
day.
reading here. This is on page 43. I will just read a little bit of it. I want everyone to buy the book and read it, but just let me read just this little portion that I marked. We talked about God, divine intervention, and Trump's purpose, but the meaning hadn't yet crystallized. I gave him room to figure it out. He seems to have pretty much put it aside. And I wouldn't say moved on. Like, it's obviously a part of you that you'll carry with you. But do you think that he's had that room to figure it out? Because he's been so busy, obviously, as the president of the United States, the busiest person in the world.
Well, because he found his purpose in that moment. Because God was there, in his mind, his words, not mine. Because God was there, because he made decisions that he never makes, and he is a man of routine. Because he brings that chart down like he's freaking Ross Perot, like, and he turns his head away, and he never does that. And he questions that several times in our when we talk. Why did I do that? And that's what I meant by giving him time. He gets to that conclusion. I have purpose. God spared me to fulfill that purpose. And that purpose has to do with get things done for the country. Now, if you think about it, Dana, and you were in the Bush administration, in a president's second administration, it does not move at the speed of light. It just doesn't. It's different.
Now it's bogged down.
Yeah, it's so bogged down. And
Trump got 2 first terms.
Yeah, he did get 2 first terms, and he's using this one
Yeah.
very, very differently. And that happened in that moment. And in terms of how he's dealt with it, and people will read this throughout the book, he struggles with the death of Corey Compatore.
I was just going to get to that because I don't want to read too much, but I noted this part. And in the afterword, you again return to Corey Compatore and how he has him on his mind a lot.
Yeah, he really does. At the end of this week on Friday, I have 2 powerful interviews with Helen Compatore and Donald Trump about Butler. It comes out on Friday in the Washington Post. And I think it really helps people if they're willing to open their mind to understand the impact that day had on him, that it had on me. I take all 3 of our lives and intertwine them.
Yeah. It's a very, very special book. Can you add, I just want to tell people one more thing. On a light note, what did the president have you try on Air Force One?
So first of all, I was on Air Force One, okay? Holy heck, right? I've been a waitress. I've worked in a sewer treatment plant. I've been a cafeteria lady. Went to community college.
You're very humble. And obviously you've done a lot of different jobs. You're also one of the best journalists in America. So that's why you're on Air Force One.
Yeah, so I'm invited to go on Air Force One to cover this steel deal, right? Huge deal. So huge. But anyways, I'm on Air Force One. And actually this happened in the Beast. I went in the Beast too.
So for people listening, if you don't know, the Beast is the president's vehicle in the motorcade.
Yeah. And I'm in the back seat with him. And he there's 2 ice cold miniature Diet Cokes.
Oh, wow. My favorite.
And here's Zito, have one. And I made a face. And he said, well, you don't like Coke? I'm like, I don't really drink pop. And he goes, pop? What's a pop? Because when you're from Western PA and Appalachia, that's what you call it.
Same here. Grew up in Colorado and Wyoming. Pop is what it was.
Yep. And so he said, why don't you drink Coke? And I said, well, when we were growing up, my parents didn't have a lot of money. We either drank milk or water. Coke was like what rich people drank. And then if we did have it, only my dad was allowed to have it. And he said, "You don't drink Coke?" And I said, "No, but I don't have any cavities, sir, because I never." And he was unimpressed with that piece of useless information. He says, "Come on, try it." He says, "It's ice cold." I'm like, "Okay." It was like selling it like he owns Coke, right? So he opens it for me, and I drink it, and I don't have a poker face to save my life, and I made the scrunchiest face ever. He goes, "I can't believe you don't like Coke."
Oh my God, I love it. What a
Wow.
great story. Wait, does he call you Zito?
Calls me Selena, and he calls me Zito. He calls me both. It just sort of depends.
Well,
But he's always very, very respectful. I think the people will love the part in the book where he chases me around with hairspray.
yes, that's a great spot. Yes, you've told that on air before too. It's so good. Your name is Selena Selena Zito, the author of this great book, Butler, The Untold Story of the Near Assassination of Donald Trump and the Fight for America's Heartland. The cover of the book is gorgeous, with a photograph taken by Selena's daughter, Shannon. Selena, what are you paying attention to right now in the next 6 months for the Trump administration? As the first 6 months we've covered, which was a whirlwind, got a lot done. What's next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be paying attention to what's going to happen with the tariffs. I think that will be interesting in how that is negotiated and prosecuted sort of in the public, which is something that President Trump is really, really good at doing, is doing this in the public. And I think that he's going to be very muscular in how he gets what he wants. And then I'm going to kind of watch, like, what's the impact on our economy. You know, there's a very different sense of success when it comes to President Trump. If you cover where I cover American politics, which is Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, people are happy. People are happy with the decisions.
And let's talk about gas prices, egg prices.
Yep,
all down.
Prices, egg prices. There's just this renewed sense of patriotism that is over the 4th of July weekend. I drove all across the state and back, and the amount of flags in small towns on US 30 just like made my heart swell. Right? It was just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And these are very diverse communities, and to see this, was just it felt really good. And I don't know that that's all about President Trump, but I do know that it's a lot about how our cultural curators have less of a stranglehold on what is part of the American conversation, right? People that are in charge of institutions in academia and larger corporations, they're the ones that sort of have a heavy hand about what we hear about in our culture. And that has been lifted and changed. And I think that has a lot to do with President Trump's presidency. But it also just has a lot to do with sort of their losing their power. And it's really interesting to me.
And we are now in the kickoff to the 250th celebration of America's birthday. So it's going to be an amazing year. And we thank you so much for being a part of our show on America's Newsroom and, of course, here on Perino on Politics. We read everything you write, and we appreciate you so much. Selena Zito, congratulations.
Thank you so much.